I also think this speaks to what you were saying with the statistic earlier about the amount of stress and pressure that's put on teachers and their amount of responsibility that they hold or that parents expect them to hold in essentially raising children, right? Because a lot of children are with their teachers more than they're with their family.
A few years ago, I started writing a fictitious story based on my time as an educator. It is called Taught, and the story was partially inspired out of anger and frustration fueled by burnout. Okay, actually it was more than partially inspired by anger and frustration. But Taught has also become a vehicle for me to tell what I thought at the time, and in some ways continue to think, was and is the real story of teaching. I now realize that my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but there are some pieces of Taught that resonated with many educators. This podcast is an extension of that story, and I, a former teacher, will interview other educators asking them to share how they really feel about the current state of education. Why are so many teachers burn out? Why are so many, like me, leaving the field? We likely won't solve any problems or come up with any solutions, but we can create a community of voices that maybe begin the conversation around how educators can take back teaching. I'm Melissa LaFleur. Welcome to Taught, the podcast. It's finally time. Last month, we had part one of our roundtable discussion on bullying in education. And I'm talking about the bullying that occurs within the field of education and by the public, not student bullying. Three of my favorite people are back this week to finish up our conversation. I'm talking about Melissa, Amy, and Sarah. If you haven't heard these three ladies in the first episode, part one of this discussion is episode 16 and is a must listen. Just go to my website, taught.buzzsprout.com, go to episode 16, give it a listen. Today's episode will pick right up where we left off after I remind you of how amazing these three ladies are and why they have some insight that will be helpful to all of us. I have three guests with me, and not only will they be my guests today, they will be part of a series we will be doing over the next 6 months. So pull up your chair and join us at the Burnout table, because today we are going to have an enlightening conversation with Melissa Anthony, Sarah Maneras, and Amy Schamberg. Let me tell you a little bit about each of these wonderful, amazing women. Melissa Anthony is a licensed counselor who specializes in trauma and grief, along with the depression and anxiety that often follow. Melissa was the trauma program coordinator for one of the largest psychiatric hospitals in Michigan. Additionally, she has experience working with folks in crisis with imminent risk, such as suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, and psychosis. These days, she has a private practice and works abroad in Portugal with her husband and 2 children. Sarah Maneras is a licensed counselor and has owned her own private practice since 2009. She is also the founder and CEO of Maneras Collective, LLC, and The We Spot. She is a writer, blogger, counselor, coach, speaker, and podcast host herself. Sarah passionately believes in the healing power of vulnerability, that by learning to speak our truth and fully embrace who we are, we become free. She loves helping people live a brave life that's in alignment with their truest and most authentic selves. Amy Schamberg earned her graduate degree in school psychology from the University of Colorado and worked as a school psychologist in the Denver metro area for over a decade. Now, as a certified functional medicine health coach, Amy continues to work in wellness consultancy roles within educational programs throughout Colorado. She specializes in mental health, burnout recovery, and holistic well being. Having experienced and recovered from her own episodes of burnout, Amy is passionate about helping others build resilience and developing the confidence to prioritize themselves. Okay, remember, we've already started this interview, it's in progress. In that same article, they stated 70% of the formal complaints, the ones that actually did go through the system the way that they're supposed to, were coming from situations where it was someone in a higher position than the person issuing the complaint that was harassing, intimidating, or bullying. So, how does this change the dynamics in your opinion of the action steps that we take?
It does make it different when there's a power over, right? Dynamic for sure. More maybe the power hierarchy in the school. And so maybe more, I'm thinking it would create more silence, more, again, that dependent on the system. I'm dependent on this job. So I'm dependent on the money that it brings me. More fear, maybe, in speaking up and saying something. But then also, what is the strategy? If you can't go to your leadership, and it's obvious that the leadership makes a huge difference in the culture of the school. But if you can't go to your leadership for support and protection, then what are the next steps? And I don't know what those are either. So maybe one of you do.
I was just going to say, this is a tough one for all of those things that you just said, Sarah. I had another guest on who was a paraeducator, teacher assistant, and she had an administrator that asked her to do something that was not legal and tried to make her feel she had to do it. And it was being in charge of a student's insulin. And she's not a registered nurse. And this administrator really put pressure on her until she actually went to her union. But then they had a terrible relationship after that. And these are contract employees. So at the whim, they can not renew their contract the next year and she's out of a job.
I'm glad you shared that. And going to your union was one of the things I was going to say. I want to acknowledge that it does feel very isolating when you are in a physical building and the person in charge of that physical building is the person who is like perpetrating or doing something that makes you feel uncomfortable or that is abusive or harassing. Yet at the same time, I want everyone to know that they can take steps to get help, and that you don't have to stay stuck in there. It's unfortunate that the situation with this particular paraeducator and her administrator became what it was. However, I also wonder, if this admin felt that it was okay to put her in that position, like what else is going on in that building and that culture, and did she even want to stay there anyways, right? So there could be something negative or uncomfortable that comes from seeking help, but it's always better to share that information, because another thing is, if it's happening to you, it's probably happening to other people. And sometimes HR is collecting a body of evidence. I've seen people fired because of this report that was made that didn't even seem that significant, but come to find out later, they had been collecting reports, right? They had been receiving complaints for months, and this one was finally the one that tipped the scale, and they were able to get that person out. So, that's something to keep in mind too. By advocating for yourself and seeking help, you are also protecting others. So that could be a way to kind of frame that too.
Yeah, as we're talking about this, I think it's hitting me full force how we have a responsibility as a community in a building too, to be there for our colleagues and to be creating the community that we're needing that supports not having these types of things happen. Which is kind of I guess, I should have always known that, but I just never really realized how important that community is. But you're absolutely right. There is a path you can go down, and when people do it, when we use the things that are put in place, a lot of times they are successful.
It's like what we teach kids. There's the bullies, the bystanders, and the upstanders, right?
Yes.
Got to be
Yes,
upstanders.
we do. Well, let's move into a trickier area now. And this is an area that we're seeing a large increase in aggression towards educators. And it's really on my mind heavily right now because, again, almost every interview I do at some point, and I don't always put that in the actual interview because a lot of times this becomes a little bit like therapy for teachers. They start talking about all these things that have happened that have been very challenging for them. But there is a large increase in students and their family members being aggressive towards educators. It's not just teachers, it's office staff, janitorial staff, administrators, school nurses, everybody. We all have to be a little more aware that this can happen now, which is just crazy to me. So, my episode that I recorded for last week I went over a news article, and the article was about a man. This guy went on stage during his daughter's graduation. So, they're going through the lineup, shaking hands. And this guy goes on stage as his daughter's crossing the line, and he shoves the superintendent out of the receiving line. And the superintendent actually pressed charges, and I think he also got a restraining order against the guy. But it's just unbelievable to me that this even happened. And the man who did the shoving said that he did it because of an incident that had a behavioral incident and how it was handled by the district. And come to find out, the superintendent wasn't even part of any of that. But this guy was the figurehead for this thing that had happened. And that's why this man went up and pushed him. So these incidents are becoming so commonplace, they aren't even making the news anymore in some cases. It's just things that we hear about that go on in our communities. And there's been a sharp rise post-pandemic. Here are some very alarming statistics. Reported violent incidents perpetrated by students towards teachers went from 46% pre-pandemic to 54%, which is almost a 10% increase post-pandemic. Percent pre-pandemic to 26% post-pandemic. So I'm not a professional here, but it seems like the parents got pretty stressed out during the pandemic and they don't have the tools necessary to deal with that level of stress. What are your thoughts on how we navigate this as educators?
Oh, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Yes, it is a thing. If you think about the family unit as a machine and every member of this machine is like a different cog or part, if there is one part of the machine that's struggling, the other parts are going to overcompensate. So if there was some dysfunction before and now the world shuts down and there are no outlets, we're not doing after school activities, we're not doing sports, we're not doing arts, there aren't eyes on the child, on the family, like anything going, no one's watching. Universal law, all things go towards chaos if left unchecked, unregulated. So we had a lot of households that were struggling and they became their own little cocoon of dysfunction. So for, 2 years, as professionals, we saw increases across the board regarding substance use, depression, anxiety, abuse, everything went up. And, even historically before the pandemic, when I would work at the psychiatric hospital, we would see such a sharp uptick in admissions once summer vacation was over. Once summer vacation was over,
Really?
oh yeah, like night and day, 50% increase in admissions. That once school started, now we have teachers who are noticing things that were hidden, or we're having students who are having outbursts in very public places, whereas before it was more private. So yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of things happening in the dark for a very long time. And there definitely are increases post-pandemic, and the teachers are getting a lot of the brunt of that. So
I also think this speaks to what you were saying with the statistic earlier about the amount of stress and pressure that's put on teachers and their amount of responsibility that they hold, or that parents expect them to hold in essentially raising children, right? Because a lot of children are with their teachers more than they're with their family. And so different places I've worked, there was always a worry or a concern for summer. What kind of support is this child going to get when school's not in session? And so I think the school has always been, or is supposed to be, a safe place for the students. And in order for it to be that, the teachers have to feel safe. But something that is shifting is the feeling of safety in general in schools. And I think it's the amount of expectation that's placed on the role of teachers in their students' lives. And to me, it feels like just an insane amount of pressure.
Yeah.
And I would also add too, like if we're talking about parents coming in and yelling at teachers or anybody in the buildings, I've witnessed this many times. It's disgusting to see. And I've been in buildings where the administrators will not tolerate that shit, and they don't. And I've been in buildings where the administrators pretend like they didn't know it happened, even when you tell them it happened.
Yeah.
And I could say that the places where the admin, like I've been in meetings with this particular admin that I'm talking about, who is amazing, and parents would get like really riled up, and they would start making demands and yelling and all these things, and he would like shut that down immediately. And he had that reputation as like, I'm not going to say his name, but this so and so doesn't put up with anything. And so there wasn't a lot of that happening. There was a few select families that it would happen with, but like I think about the other buildings where this other person just kind of turned a blind eye, and like everyone was kind of on pins and needles because you didn't feel like your administrator had your back if something were to happen. And it felt really scary because you never know when, somebody's going to fly off the handle or come in, and like, what are you supposed to do about that if you're not
Well,
supported by leaders?
that's right. I mean, so a couple things. Sarah mentioned safety, and has come up from teachers as well. And somebody made a really great point. I think it was Tracy, former guest. She said, pre-pandemic, we came in, we did whatever. When we came back into the classroom, we set it up and basically told kids it's not safe. So we came back in and we said, okay, every time you go out the door, you have to use hand sanitizer. Every time you come back in, you have to use hand sanitizer. We became the mask police, right? So our whole job was saying, this place isn't safe. And these are the things that we have to teach you now to keep you safe, which was a huge burden on teachers. We're not nurses, we're not whatever. But I think that kind of the whole world felt unsafe. And then kids came back and they expected us to know what we were doing, and we didn't. And so that led to this sense of maybe safety is not that it wasn't unsafe, but it was less secure than it was when they left pre-pandemic. And the second thing is speaking to your point, Amy, that's kind of where I went on the podcast. This goes back to that. This is my whole opinion thing. But my opinion is exactly what you said. When we hold people accountable for this behavior, the behavior occurs less. And this administrator that I did the article on, he's gotten a little bit of flack for pressing charges and then filing a restraining order. But I think that if we did more of those types of things when inappropriate things happen, that we would have less of this behavior. And I'm not talking about I've seen these videos where, they take a kindergartner to jail in handcuffs. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if an adult is behaving in an inappropriate way, we give them whatever the consequence anyone else would be given in that situation. Just because we are educators does not give you the right to come in and choose somebody out. If you wouldn't go do that in the bank to the bank president, then you shouldn't be coming in my classroom and doing it, or wherever else. Nobody deserves that. So sorry, get off my soapbox now, but I think that was a really good point. It doesn't happen when we hold people accountable. Another thing that has come up with my American and UK guests on the podcast, and this one was a little surprising, and then I started looking for it and I saw it myself, is how villainized educators can be in the media. And at the beginning of the pandemic, the rhetoric was how teachers were heroes and frontline warriors. And at some point, that changed. And we became ultra villains. Boy, that whole "you're making my kid wear a mask in the classroom." Boy, did I get emails and phone calls and conversations about that. And I really believe that, this ultra villainization is largely due to us being used as political pawns on both sides. And I realize this steps out of the world of mental health help, or does it? But I'm interested in your take on that. And if you have any strategies. I mean, I think most of our strategies have been the same. We've got to support each other. But if you have anything new around that, I'd love to hear it.
I think you're spot on. I think, like most things, anything and everything now is politics in America. Like everything and anything makes a statement. It's a tug of war. We're very stagnant. Losing the ability to see the middle in things, or saying that both can be true, or any of the, it's just you're either demonized or you're worshipped. And it's sad. I think in a lot of ways teachers have become the scapegoat. And what do we do? Like, I'm hoping enough people eventually see what a huge, massive game it just feels like it is. It just feels like such a game. I'm either this or I'm that. End of story. Honey, it is 2024. Like, we are as fluid as our molecules. We are allowed to say, nope, this isn't factual. We are allowed to say, well, I like this, this, and this, and this, and that. But to be all in because your party says so on any given time, I just think that's, I'm getting off my platform. Someone else take over. But my heart goes out to you, I guess is what I'm saying. My heart goes out to you. It really does, because you're right. You are politicized.
Well, I 100% agree with you, though, Melissa. And my thing is, I'll just add to your soapbox, which is, at what point do we say our country belongs to the people, not the politicians?
Yes,
why are we pandering to either side? This is our country. But
it's tug of war. Any given topic is tug of war. If you say this, you're an idiot. If you do that, you're an idiot. Like, it shouldn't have to be. Every single thing is so emotionally charged, and you have to take a stance and be all in 1,000% on every single topic. It really is a giant tug of war, and it's keeping our country stagnant. It just is. And I cannot think of a time in my life where there's been so much going back to safety. Collectively, I don't think our culture is safe. I don't think our culture is safe collectively. I think when you turn on the news and you see all of this information being bombed at you, and all the violence and anger and debate, and it's just a really sad time to be alive. It is hard to look anywhere without seeing sadness, despair, or violence. And I think people are feeling that. I think people are feeling that at a very deep, deep level. So The teachers are one more fight, but everything's a fight right now. So safety is not a common occurrence today.
So solutions. You're looking for solutions, Melissa. We're
Sarah,
taking
I
on the
don't.
world. We're taking on the world's issues but yes, we do need, like, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, the action moving forward. How do you make it different? Because it's really easy to get stuck in the overwhelm of how ugly it feels right now and how hard things can feel. And so where is the empowerment and the hope? And because that's really the key. And so the action moving forward is what changes things. And for me, I think if there's something that's happening that's hurtful, if there's something that's happening that is not in alignment with you, that's not okay with you, the way to make change is to raise your voice, to speak up, to say something, to be the squeaky wheel, be the the boat rocker, be the boat rocker, the one. And if that feels undoable, then taking a look at what do I need to be empowered in these ways so that I can speak up. And maybe it's getting support. Maybe it's working on your confidence, whatever it is, looking at how can I empower myself to speak up. Because I think that's the key in so many ways.
Yeah.
So Sarah wants more of us on our soapboxes. Speak up! It's all
Speak
hope.
up!
We're going to talk more about back off.
Well, that's what this is, though, Melissa.
Yeah,
That's what this platform and this podcast is. It's speaking up, and it's not letting it hide in the darkness and where it breeds fear and shame and all of those things. It's bringing it out into the light and saying these things aren't okay, and we're not going to put up with it anymore.
I love
Yes,
that.
ma'am.
I'm
And,
not gonna put up
you
with
know,
it.
here's the thing. Yes, it totally sucks to have to speak up about something shitty that's happening that you do not cause or has nothing to do with you. But like we still have a choice and we have the ability to do something. And it's okay to acknowledge the fact that it's uncomfortable to use our voice sometimes. You know, Melissa and I talked about resilience recently and and talking about that is being proactive. That is like looking at challenges as an opportunity for growth and doing something a little bit different that might put us in a position that doesn't feel totally comfortable. We're going to do it anyways. And then we're going to grow from that and feel better and have more, empowerment next time. And so maybe it's just starting small. Like it doesn't have to be some big, huge thing, like just speaking up about something little to kind of build that muscle and kind of, gain that success and momentum and self-confidence and like understanding that you can speak your mind and you can, do these things without the world ending. And I think it just starts like that.
And Amy taught me that you can bank resilience. So you can practice it and bank it and then use it as the opportunities provide themselves. I'm excited to try this. So I think that we have covered all my bullying topics for today. I want to just give a heartfelt thank you to all three of you for contributing to this conversation. And anybody out there listening, if you're inspired to take a step and talk about what you think needs to be talked about in education, there's many places that you can join this conversation on the platform at taught.buzzsprout.com. Additionally, we're always looking to bring more voices into what we have to say. Before we go, ladies, did you have anything else that you want to say today?
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa, for being a boat rocker.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me, Melissa. I appreciate it. It was fun.
All right. So until next time, This is Taught, the podcast.
I wish I knew.
Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is by Otis McDonald featuring Joni Inez. If you know someone who might enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast episodes as much and as often as you can. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access today's episode and sending it in a message or sharing it on social media. I'm a small, independent operation, and your shares broaden our audience. Perhaps you or someone you know will be inspired to talk about teacher burnout. If you would like to get your voice on my podcast, contact me via the link on my webpage, taught.buzzsprout.com. Coach, speaker, and author Rashid Ogunlaru said, "It may take many voices for people to hear the same message." Join me in being one of the many voices rising up to get the message out around educator burnout. This is Melissa LaFleur. Thank you for listening to Taught, the podcast.
I wish I knew.
I have an important reminder/disclaimer to share. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Content provided on this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be taken as professional advice. We encourage you to do your own research and consult with qualified professionals before making any decisions based on the information discussed in this or any other episode. Additionally, any opinions or statements made during the podcast are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, or individual. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you for tuning in,